Let me tell you about my favorite bike of all time. A bike that I would gladly trade all of my current bikes for and probably half my soul to cover the rest of the cost. There is no qualifier when it comes to calling this bike my favorite. It's my favorite bike. Period. So that's why I'm prepared to do a two-part video on it, with this first video being about the history of the classic Honda CBX 6-cylinder 1000 and what makes it so special, and the second video being about what awesome custom bikes these things make and how I kind of feel about it personally. In a perfect world, I'd own this bike and I'd make it 100% my own to keep for as long as time would allow me. But before I start getting too personal, let me just hurry up and tell you about this bike and how it was in the late 70s and early 80s. Throughout the 1970s, Honda had firmly established themselves as the king of the sea of UJM bikes flooding the entire planet. Every manufacturer of the Big Four of Japan had their own line of UJMs, but Honda was different in that they were absolutely shoveling out CB bikes in basically any displacement that they wanted. Hell, the CB bikes also came in several scrambler packages with the CL line of bikes. These displacements included, but were not limited to, 100s, 125s, 175s, 200s, 250s, 350s, 360s, 400s, 500s, 550s, 650s, and of course the OG daddy, the CB750, a bike which everyone agrees revolutionized the level of influence that Japan had on high displacement motorcycles worldwide at the time, both helping establish the mastery of the four-banger engine with its superbike title and kickstarting the UJM craze for the Big Four of Japan. The CB750 was mass-produced in several forms for decades, finally ending in 2003, and it's earned its great reputation among custom bike builders and collectors alike, with the single-cam examples being highly sought after.
This CB750 impressed people with its performance, and the price was very reasonable. That's why the CB750 was a big hit not only in the United States and Japan, but all over the world. This model could be regarded as the flagship of the sporty motorcycles for Honda.
Now, Honda had a leader bike in the form of the GL1000 Goldwing since 1974 actually, which was running a quite complex liquid-cooled flat 4 single overhead cam engine putting out a respectable 80 horses. You know, I wonder if the original Goldwing will ever become popular for bike builders, because even though this thing weighs about 600 pounds, you gotta admit that that box engine with, you know, with all the chrome bits, it looks pretty damn cool, right? Kind of reminds me of my K bike with the engine tipped over. Actually, the K100 doesn't weigh much less than the Goldwing at 536 pounds away. Oh wait, no, I read that wrong actually. The Goldwing is actually 600 pounds dry. Never mind. Anyway, the Goldwing was obviously a tourer and couldn't smoke anything that wasn't a senior citizen power walking the bingo. And quite frankly, it had been a long time since Honda had introduced anything exciting and fast since the CB750 in 1969. The rest of the Big Four had started to notice that. So instead of just maybe, you know, boring out the 750 engine, boring and stroking it to some obscure displacement that would give the already quick CB750 some extra beans, they instead actually went entirely back to the drawing board and dusted off legendary Shoichiro Irimajiri, a veteran of the Honda GP bike division during the 1960s, where Honda basically housed everyone, and more specifically, the lead engineer of bikes like the RC165 250cc 6-cylinder race bike, as well as the 5-cylinder 125cc race bikes of the same decade. So they got this guy to help create something very, very special. So for the sake of not butchering this man's name, I'm just gonna refer to him as Mr. Edie for simplicity. The thing about Mr. Edie is that not only was he brilliant, but his job at Honda's racing wing allowed him to work with what was practically a blank check, because Honda put an extremely high amount of effort into racing, and with zero rules, because these motorcycles would not be bogged down by regulations and other annoying road bike problems. What this resulted in was bikes like these that have these outlandish specifications. I mean, really? A 50cc 2-cylinder with 4 valves per cylinder? I mean, can you imagine the size of those puny little valves? Or really puny little anything to do with this engine? Actually, you don't even have to imagine, because look. Look how cute the little wank shaft. Oh, look at the little piston. But what you notice is that there's a common theme for the engines that Mr. Edie had led. That theme is basically that you put as many cylinders as optimally possible for the displacement, high RPM power with 4 valves per cylinder and dual overhead camshafts. Remember, this was the mid-1960s, which makes it all even more impressive. He was an extremely hard worker and passionate engineer, but also, failure was not taken lightly at Honda. After kicking ass on the track for the better part of the 1960s, we come back to where this video started, which was the mid-70s, where Mr. Eadie had made a reputation for himself and he was tasked with creating this new exciting successor to the CB750. Naturally, with his GP racing knowledge and his understanding of high cylinder count bikes, the CBX project was going to be something extremely interesting. And remember, that's what Honda and Mr. Eadie were specifically going for with the CBX. They wanted to release something exhilarating and exciting in his own words. Speed and weight be damned for the most part. In 1976, the development of the CBX had officially begun, and the team had to decide whether or not they would go with a unique 6-cylinder or to simply derive a road-going motor from the endurance race at the time, the RCB 1000. Yeah, not the CBR, the RCB. Don't get confused. I almost got confused there. The RCB 1000 was a full-on race bike that kind of looked like a pissed-off frog that made between 150 and 120 horsepower out of its air-cooled dual-overhead cam 4-banger engine. So what the team did was sort of build a prototype CB1000F, which was based on the RCB 1000 endurance racer, alongside the CBX 6-cylinder. And guess what? It was faster. Yeah. Yep, way lighter than the 6, and it even made more power. But, remember, exciting, exhilarating. That's what we're going for here. So, Mr. Eadie, he cited the exhaust sound, the acceleration, the vibration, yet smoothness of the 6, and he made it an obvious choice, even for a guy who spent most of his career making Honda go as fast as possible. I mean, think about it, that engine must have been quite convincing. Well, later on, he had admitted that he would go with a lighter, more powerful, and water-cooled design, probably at the expense of the already high price tag at the time. In fact, this was basically something that Kawasaki copied and did with the water-cooled KZ1300 just 1 year after Honda dropped the CBX. How dirty. That's definitely out of a page of the Kawasaki book. Basically, when it comes to the KZ1300 versus the CBX 1000, it's a matter of, do you want more power and liquid cooling? Go with the ripoff. I mean the Cowie. If you want GP racing prestige and simple but reliable Honda air cooling, X gon' give it to you. But I digress. The RCB-derived bike later became the CB900F, which used the same technology, but the displacement was obviously bumped down a little bit. Now, the CBX 1000 wasn't the first 6-cylinder road bike. That actually goes to one of the Benellis, a sehr, I don't know how you say it, which ran from 1972 to 1978. But even that was really a Honda at its core, because the engine was actually derived from the Honda CB500 engine with 2 extra cylinders added, hence the displacement of 750. In 1979, the displacement was bought out to 900, and it was sold up until 1989. But naturally, as a small European manufacturer, the numbers of models produced was merely like 5,000 odd 6-cylinder bikes in the 17 years or so. When the press was given production bikes in 1978 for the CBX, the response was largely positive, more than likely having to do with the novelty of having 6 cylinders to begin with, the surprisingly decent handling and the fantastic fit and finish, and the well-rounded nature of the machine. The CBX engine breathed through 6 28mm carburetors, bringing to life through an electric starter and sending its power through a wet clutch into a 5-speed transmission connected to a standard chain drive system. The suspension and chassis was rather basic and kind of dated back to the 60s. Air-assisted fork system and twin shocks and a stress member engine eliminating, down tubes. The brakes were 3-disc all around, pretty fine for the time, but she was heavy, weighing in at 600 pounds wet, and this proved to be the biggest issue to overcome. My point is, they put a lot of effort into getting the weight down on this bike, so quite frankly, this thing could have been even heavier than that. The engine put out 105 horsepower at the crank at 9,000 RPM and 52 pounds-feet at 6,500 RPM. With its air-cooled yet dual-overhead cam and 4-valve per cylinder motor, the engine had embodied the past and latest technology. The CBX had borrowed ahead of its time engineering from the 6s from the 60s, which translated to a smoother road experience. But the CBX was far from a commercial success. With some people, the price of the damn thing was just enough to turn them off and keep them riding 4-bangers and below. Honda wanted just about $4,000 for one of these things, and I imagine with the touring models and with all the bells and whistles, it costed even more. The thing is, the $4,000 in 1979 that they wanted translates to about $15,000 in 2019, and you may as well call it $16,000 because I'm sure there was some fees and taxes out the door on top of that. The CBX also confused and intimidated some people because, look at that engine. I'll be honest, it doesn't look natural. It does not look natural at all. It looks kind of like it would bank too much like an airplane, when you tip it over. That engine is basically a giant ass wing. And what if you drop it, The frame slider is the engine. Eventually, as smaller, lighter, and faster bikes have begun to come out, and Honda was getting ready to unleash the V4 line of bikes, the CBX had begun to sink further into novelty. That weird bike with way too many cylinders. By the time 82 had come around, Honda could barely even give these things away, And imagine that, because now these bikes are firmly in the $7,000 and up range. But that's something I'd rather get into on the next video, where I discussed my fandom of the bike and the resurgence and appreciation and cult status that the bike has received, and the custom scene of the Honda CBX. Basically the meta life of the bike, if you will. This video was full of facts, but next video, I'm gonna get highly opinionated, be it negative or positive. And I'll certainly paint a picture of both what my intentions would be with this bike if I owned it, and straight up why the Honda CBX 1000 is my favorite bike ever. Thanks for watching.